Hi, Greg. One of your devoted readers.
Oh, good. So you're the one.
Yes.
Oh, there's one other one.
Yeah.
I see him out in the park.
Yeah.
And your sports background is very important as well,
Well, yeah.
with baseball being the topic.
Yes. Well, and hopefully, yeah, we'll talk about that, but we'll just kind of have
Whatever,
an open-ended conversation.
Open-ended conversation.
Would you like some water?
No, thank you.
I would. I'd love some. Thank you.
But the subject I came down here on was baseball. With the
That's what I
Rotarians-
hear.
With the Rotarians yesterday. And one of the lines I had was, during the great controversy over whether or not the Nintendo people were to be allowed, to buy an American baseball team.
Sure.
Then the first Bush called Chuck Armstrong, who was to be the president of the Mariners, and Chuck picked up the telephone, and the voice said, "The president is calling," and Chuck said, "The president of what?" And recovered from his embarrassment, I guess, during the course of the conversation.
How, I know you were born in Chicago. How long were you in Chicago?
Until I was 2 days old.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in Evanston,
Oh, how long were you in Evanston?
Illinois. Until my family moved back east about the time I finished law school.
Oh, okay.
And came out here.
So
I grew up as a fan of the Chicago Cubs.
that's what I was afraid of. Yeah.
And I can say that a long lifetime of cheering for the Chicago Cubs and the Seattle Mariners doesn't teach you patience. Nothing else in life will.
Well, I grew up in the Chicago area as well. Southwest suburb, Oak Lawn.
Oh, okay.
But both Greg Jane and my daughter both went to Northwestern, so they have Evanston
I know
ties.
Evanston well.
Okay.
But I'm a big White Sox fan. You know we don't get along.
I know that. If you come from the south side, you're a White Sox fan.
That's right.
And from the north side, you're a Cubs fan.
That's right. Although
And
this
both
year,
of them are in first place this year.
how about that?
That's never happened before.
That could be a heck of a World Series right there.
It would be.
Is it
Well,
Jordan? Is Jordan?
no. Oh, no, I just
I'm
read it.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So we'll officially get started. I'd like to welcome Senator Slade Gorton. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, I think we'll just have a casual,
Fine.
open-ended conversation here, but appreciate you joining us. So we were talking a little baseball. So briefly, what did bring you to town?
I came to speak to the Rotary Club yesterday about a history of the Seattle Mariners, because very bluntly, I've been a part of that history since they began.
Sure. So, and what role did you play in bringing the team and then in keeping them in town?
In the year 1969,
Right.
ancient history, Seattle had an expansion team called the Seattle Pilots.
Sure.
Because the people of King County had voted the tax on themselves to build the kingdom for it. And the American League had promised that if there were a stadium, we would have a team. But the pilots, who were absentee owned and totally underfunded, left after 1 year and are now the Milwaukee Brewers. I was in my first year as Attorney General of the state, and I sued the American League as a result for fraud and breach of contract. They were exempt from the antitrust laws, of course, as baseball is. You couldn't go directly after them. And hired as the Special Assistant Attorney General a man named Bill Dwyer, who was later a federal district court judge who would have had Clark County in his jurisdiction. Bill Dwyer was, in my view, the best trial lawyer in the city of Seattle. And it took us 5 years to get the American League in all the legal maneuvers before we got them in front of a jury in Everett. And at the end of the trial, just before the verdict was to come down, the way I put it this way, only a little facetiously, is the American League lawyers recognized the jury was going to vote capital punishment. We had them in front of a hometown jury, and we were going to win big. And so almost overnight, the American League agreed to create the Seattle Mariners. But so incidentally, I'm also responsible for the Toronto Blue Jays because, of course, they had to go up by 2
That's right.
because of the way the schedules work. But the way I started my talk yesterday is I I just read off 4 names. Bill Daley, one after another, of the 4 owners of Seattle baseball teams, all of whom had nothing to do with Seattle or the Pacific Northwest, had no particular feeling for us at all. All of whom were majority owners of the Mariners, and all of whom, and none of whom had enough money really to run a Major League Baseball team. It takes a super rich person to have it as a toy. That's, in effect, that's what it amounted to them. And the last one, Jeff Smulyan, who was from Indianapolis and owned a string of radio stations, got a sweetheart deal on the King home. I think he was paying $1 a year rent for it, in return for which he had agreed that before he moved it or offered it for sale, he would have it up for sale for someone who would keep it in Seattle at a price to be set by an appraiser. Given the history of the team, he thought this was a really good deal because no such person existed in Seattle. But I was in the U.S. Senate then, so when they had effectively decided they were going to move to Tampa, last week we had a celebration of the 25th anniversary of this, and John Ellis, who was their CEO, came in with a T-shirt that read "Tampa Bay Mariners" on it. He had, people came to me, well, you created this team, find a buyer. And I had always thought that Japan was a source of a place to find someone interested in Major League Baseball. They're great baseball fans. They have great baseball leagues and the like. And Nintendo of America is located just outside of Seattle. So I had my scheduler called Nintendo and asked for an appointment. And they were very polite, and they said, now what's the subject? The subject is baseball. Well, the reply was, we're not interested in baseball, but if the senator wants to come and see us, we will be happy to see him. And the way I put it is, for people not interested in baseball, they kept me there for 2 hours, and that would be an awful lot of questions. This was in December of 1991. I went off. I went to watch the dissolution of the Soviet Union. I went to Moscow and got pneumonia while I was there and came back half sick. And on the eve of Christmas Eve, December 23rd of that year, Minoru Arakawa, who was the CEO of Nintendo of America and the son-in-law of the owner of Nintendo in Japan, called me on the telephone and said, and I can repeat it to this day, Mr. Senator, my father-in-law says the state of Washington and Seattle have been very good to us. We've done very well here. We believe we owe something to the community, and so if you need $100 million to buy a baseball team, you've got $100 million. That was the conversation. Actually, the appraisal came in at 106, ultimately. But we had 6 months of anti-Japanese feeling then. I think it was the owner of the Oakland A's who said, let's lead them on and then which is in the book of the history of the Seattle Mariners. They said, oh, we have a policy against foreign ownership of Major League Baseball teams. Of course, they had Toronto and Montreal, so they quickly amended that to North American owners. But basically, in a sense, people like you, major news media throughout the United States, really crawled all over them for racism and for this very parochial attitude, and we ran a pretty good public relations campaign. However, it was Hiroshi Yamauchi was the name of the man in Japan who put his own personal money into it at first. They had to reduce their interest from 100% to 70%, get 30% local ownership, which was relatively easy to do. They then got one member on a 7-member board of directors of the corporation running the team, and had to hire a local chief executive officer who had plenary authority over the team, who could do with it whatever he wanted. And they ended up agreeing to all of those things. Instead of just telling them, why don't you guys go to hell? They ended up doing it. And the CEO turned out to be John Ellis. John Ellis was the retiring CEO of Puget Sound Energy at the time. He just retired. He is the single person in the state of Washington I've known longer than anyone else. I met him the first week I came here. I came here blind. I just picked Seattle out of the almanac to the place to live after law school, and I met him the first week that I lived here. So the world is a very small place in many respects. And then there was another crisis over building Safeco Field, which at one point John Ellis said, I will never talk to another politician for the rest of my life. He was so frustrated with the King County Council. And I was the one exception and put that one back together.
Nice.
So I am very much invested in baseball in Seattle. I can tell you.
Cubs fans. Let's talk about the other national sport, politics. How do you sum up what's going on in the Republican Party today?
Well, I will answer a different question for you. I think the people of the United States are right now faced with a choice between a fascist and a felon, and I won't vote for either one of them.
Okay.
So that partly answers your question.
Right. Do you have I get it. So let me see if I've got my. So Trump would be the fascist, and Clinton would be the felon. Can you tell me a little bit more about Trump and your opinion?
Yeah. And to get analytical about it, Trump wants to make a deal. He talks about how well he is at making deals. But Trump's definition of a deal is I win, you lose. It's a zero-sum game with him. But the deals the President of the United States make are not like that. Really good deals, both sides benefit. I buy your newspaper, you're happy, I'm happy. It isn't something that you've won and I've lost, or the other way around. That is not, and the way he views foreign policy is just that. We've been suckers. We always lose these deals. Well, you don't lose deals like that. Both sides win. Both sides have won with the North American Free Trade Agreement. Both sides win in NATO, and the like. I think he is a lethal combination of ignorance and arrogance.
Okay. Well, you don't mince words. That's always a good thing. Although that's what you were always known for when you were in the Senate. What about the Republican Party in general today? Back in your day, you were considered a bit of a deal maker, somebody who leaned a little bit more moderately on occasion in order to get deals made. How do you describe what's going on in the Republican Party today?
The question is wrong when you ask about the Republican Party. The same thing has happened to both parties. The Democratic Party has moved left and the Republican Party has moved right. National Journal is a D.C. publication, mostly about Congress, that every year publishes an analysis of senators and representatives' votes, of all of them. It does a very careful job. It divides votes into three categories: defense and foreign policy, economic policy, social policy. And you find yourself on a spectrum. When I was in the Senate, and it was probably even more true before I got to the Senate, there were probably 12 or 14 Republicans who were more liberal or moderate than the most conservative Democrat. And there was an overlap like that in both houses. In the last 2 or 3 years, there has been no overlap because many of the more liberal Republicans and their constituencies are gone, and the same thing is true with Democrats. There really are no more conservative Democrats there. So people are much more talking past one another than dealing with one another. And the endangered Republican senators in this year's elections are almost all from the northern Midwest or the Northeast, like Ayotte in New Hampshire, for example, of Ohio, Illinois, in those places. And if they're endangered Democrats, are in places like Colorado and Nevada. And we just, you know, I was a member of the State Redistricting Commission a couple of years ago that redrew our congressional and legislative district lines. And most of the literature says the problem is redistricting and gerrymandering. I don't believe that. The American people have redistricted themselves. You know, we live in much more unitary areas. When we were drawing legislative district lines for this state, I didn't care where the lines went in the city of Seattle. If I'd done it all by myself, I could not have drawn a competitive legislative district in the city of Seattle. There's no way to do it. And the Democrats can't really draw one in eastern Washington, except for downtown Spokane. And in eastern Washington, every member of the legislature is a Republican, except for the downtown Spokane district. And in the urban line through Puget Sound, all the districts are Democratic, and you can't do it any other way. And that's a bad thing. When I went my first term in the legislature, in the State House, there were 33 Republicans and 66 Democrats. But 9 of the Republicans were from the city of Seattle. And there were lots of Democrats from rural parts of the state. And so both caucuses were geographically statewide. That's not true anymore. And the same thing holds nationally in Congress. I think the best election reform, first, I think Washington state has the best redistricting system in the country because it's evenly divided. There's no tiebreaker. So you've got to get along with the people on the other side of it, or it will never succeed. But the second great advantage we have is the top 2 primary. The top 2 primary has 2 huge advantages. One, it tells the candidate you are always talking to all of the people, not just after the primary, but before the primary as well. Everybody is your constituent. You've got to talk to all of them. And the second thing is that it says you as a voter will always have a choice for the legislature. It may be 2 Democrats, it may be 2 Republicans, but there are going to be differences between the 2 of them, and your vote will still really count. Where in a place where there's 1 R and 1 D, 3/4 of the districts, the election's over after the primary. After the primary is over, and it gripes me a little bit because it keeps being called the California system. California's copied us. We were the ones who started it.
I didn't want to not have you comment on Hillary Clinton since you commented on Donald Trump, characterized her as a felon. What's your thoughts of Hillary Clinton?
She has been in an important position in the United States for, I can't count how many years now, and she's never accomplished anything. And she has no guiding philosophy except what's good for the Clinton family. Through everything that she's done, you could just see in this presidential campaign. Well, now she has to get as close to Sanders as she can get to limit his vote. And it doesn't matter whether. So she's repudiated free trade. She's repudiated all kinds of things that she nominally believed in previously, and all kinds of things that her husband did when he was president of the United States. And she has almost no regard for the truth. Other than that, fine person.
I want to give you a number. I don't know that you would remember it, but the number is 2,229.
Yes, that's the margin by which I lost to Cantwell.
That's the margin you lost by Maria Cantwell. How often do you think about that race and how close it is?
I don't deal with the past very much.
No?
To be perfectly honest with you. And a race of that sort, everyone could say it was this or it was that. Well, it was all of those things. If there had been 5 different things slightly different, it might very well have been come out differently. But I'll tell you, I am egotistical enough to think that election cost the state and cost America, but it was a great benefit to me. First, I got to watch and participate in my grandchildren growing up. Second, I made much more money than I did in the United States Senate. Third, I was a member of the 9/11 Commission, which was an absolutely unique experience in life, and which did a terrific job. And a whole, like, other things like the Redistricting Commission, like one on the War Powers of the United States, and I'm on a number of boards, and have a very interesting life, none of which I could have done had I been reelected that time. Because I know perfectly well that had I been reelected in 2000, I wouldn't have even bothered to run in 2006.
And is that just the changing demographics
It
of the
was just
state?
this 26 was just a huge Democratic year, and the state is becoming more Democratic.
Right.
Our candidate that year was Mike McGavick, who was probably the greatest staffer I ever, one of the brightest people I've ever come across in my life. Mike was wise enough not to ask me whether or not I thought he should run in 2006, but only whether or not I would support him. Because at about the time that he decided to run, I decided that I would not have.
Right, right. You were also known in the Senate as someone who, and if I phrase this wrong, please correct me, who advocated against the powers of Native Americans and what they are accomplishing, like casinos. We have a casino.
I know you do.
What's your view today on Native American casino usage, and maybe particularly what's going on outside the center?
Outside
the casino, just outside of the center is where they're
oh,
building this
okay.
casino.
Well, your particular Clark County problems are your problems, and I'm not here to tell you what you ought to, what you should or should not do. First, I think the one issue on which I have been a consistent loser through my entire political career, Indian or non-Indian, is that I think gambling is a great social ill. We had, when I was in the legislature, when I was first Attorney General, there was a tolerance policy in the state of Washington, particularly in King County and in Seattle, that corrupted the Seattle police and the like. And I ginned up an Attorney General's opinion that all of this was it was illegal and unconstitutional, what was going on. It caused a tremendous change and an ultimate cleanup of the Seattle Police Department and the like. But it also deprived the churches of being able to run bingo.
Right.
And so the legislature made the situation far more liberal and pro-gambling than it was before I started down that road. So I'm against Indian casinos because I'm against all casinos. As far as I'm concerned, they're just a bad thing for society.
But would you think with an Indian casino with no generation of tax revenues that might put them in a worse spot in your view than a casino that might generate tax revenues?
That pays taxes?
Right.
Yeah, but that's a minor element of it in my mind.
Okay. Okay, it's just basically gambling is not a good thing. And you got to keep it out as much as possible.
Yes.
And yeah, it looks like from the United States statistics on gambling and casinos that you're way on the losing side.
I'm way on the losing side. So I haven't thought much about it in the last few years.
So have you ever made a bet in your life?
Yes. There's one form of gambling in which I engage once a year. I go to the horse races.
Oh, Kentucky Derby time?
Oh, no. Oh, well, no, I've never been to the
Oh,
Kentucky
okay.
Derby.
What's the one time a year? Just once a year you do it?
Just once a year.
Oh, okay.
I haven't done it for the last couple of years, but once a year.
Up in Seattle?
I'm in Seattle,
Yeah.
usually.
Yeah.
Though for a while my wife and I would go down for the week between Christmas and New Year's to south of Los Angeles, and so I went to
Santa Anita?
Santa Anita one time.
It's
That was a
beautiful
very
track.
interesting place.
Yeah, very.
And usually it was about $20 a day afternoon.
Well, you got out cheap.
Yeah. I want to go back. You mentioned how Democrats have moved farther to the left, Republicans more to the right. What is a centrist to do? Wait, is there a place for people who are in the middle politically?
Well, in fact, there still are, though it's not seen much in their voting records in Washington D.C. But certainly you can see that now in Olympia, with the very close division between the two houses, and with the fact that for about the last 4 years there's actually been a coalition running the state Senate. There's actually a one vote Republican majority now, but still one of the Democrats works with them. They are, and I have thought that to be a very good thing, because they have got to get along, and they have. And I think the last couple of sessions of our state legislature have been among the most productive that we have ever had. And the same thing, and the same thing would be true, and was true most of the time I was in Congress. I was never in Congress with a Republican president and two Republican houses. I was only for a relatively short time with a Democratic president and two Democratic Congresses. But Clinton was a deal maker, unlike Obama, and some fairly constructive things happened even then, because of course then the filibuster was in full swing, and there were enough Republicans so we could prevent ourselves from being totally run over in the Senate. And the great advantage of the filibuster rule then, and for many years, was that it required both parties in the Senate to listen to one another and to make some form of compromises. The present filibuster, I think, is useless. I would get rid of it, because it's been good for nothing with both parties in a majority in the Senate, except stopping anything from happening at all. Sure. It's no longer used as a bargaining chip. It's used just to say no.
No, and you mentioned Clinton was a deal maker, and you don't feel that Obama is.
No.
Is that Obama's fault, or is that just the current state of Congress?
It's both, but it was probably symbolized by Obama calling a meeting, of both parties together in March or April of his first year, and Ryan making a suggestion, and Obama's response was, "We won." I think that was the turning point in the Obama administration. I think the worst thing that happened to Obama was getting 60 Democratic votes in the Senate. If there had only been 57 Democratic senators when he became President of the United States, he would have been forced to deal with the other side, sure. And I think the country would today be better off. We would not have asked, we're in the midst of a recession, and he does health care. And he does health care without any contribution from the other side. And that's why it's remained so controversial. Mm-hmm. If they had worked that out, the answer would have been somewhat different, and it would have been settled.
Sure. At that point in time, do you see, was there a way he could have gotten some Republican support? Do you think it would be different if he had had at least one or two Republican votes for the Affordable Care Act?
No. He bribed a couple of Democratic votes on it, who were the Louisiana Purchase, remember that? Remember that term? And what was it? The Nebraska, something right. With one of the senators of Nebraska.
Right.
No, there's a great difference between peeling off one or two members of the opposition party and making a compromise with the opposition party. You need to make something bipartisan. You've got to get at least a quarter of the members of the other party to have agreed on it. You can't do individual favors for them. And get your task done.
Sure. Now, I think most people would agree that situation is bad for the country. How do we get out of this? Do you foresee a future administration being able to compromise? Do you see the sides coming together, or are we kind of stuck in this intransigence?
Well, we always, every projection you ever see takes what it's been like for the last 2 or 3 years and draws a straight line out, sure. But it never turns out to be a straight line. The economy or anything else. Yeah, this situation isn't going to continue forever by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe Trump is a total disaster and the Democrats control everything next year and do what they want. I think that's unlikely, but it's certainly possible. As I said, for 2 or 3 years, the one mantra I've had about this year's election was I was absolutely convinced Hillary Clinton would never be president of the United States, but I didn't think we were going to nominate Trump.
So what do you think now? Who's going to win?
I don't know. My guess is that Clinton wins, but this is such a volatile situation and so different a year, and people are responding, so differently that no one can make a prediction like that, with any high degree of confidence. I don't think.
Senator,
And we don't know whether there'll be a significant third-party effort sometime in the next couple of months. If there will, I'll vote for it, whoever that candidate is. I think Bloomberg would be a perfect third-party candidate because he could appeal to Democrats as well as Republicans. But he only said he would go if Sanders and Trump were the nominees.
Senator,
I don't see any difference between the two, but if it's up to him to make that determination.
you were I don't have to tell you this, but you were the last Republican senator to be elected here in the state of Washington. And I believe there has not been a Republican
We've gone
governor.
longer without a governor than any other state in the country.
Right. Is there any, do you see any path forward for the state of Washington from a statewide Republican standpoint? Or do you think that this is a Democratic
Well, I'm
state?
glad you brought that question up, because I do think that there's a fairly good chance that we'll elect Bill Bryant governor. We have as highly qualified a candidate for governor as we've ever had in Bill, in my view. And I say I'm on its statewide steering committee, on this, and we have an incompetent and lazy governor, and that's about as good a chance as you're going to have. And maybe it's 50-50. It's certainly no better than that. But I think that this state, even if Trump bombs, I look back to the first major campaign I was ever involved in, which was the first Evans campaign, who was elected governor in this state when Barry Goldwater got 37% of the vote at the top of the ticket. We are a ticket-splitting state, and so I think Bryant could even survive a big loss at the top of the ticket. I'm not willing to bet my homestead on it by any means, but I think there's a very good chance, and that it obviously I think it would be a wonderful change for the state itself. But that's a big race this year.
Sure. Do you have any opinions on the U.S. senators in our state as we speak?
I'm supporting Chris Vance. I think Chris Vance would be a very fine senator. I think he has no chance of winning.
Okay, well that's honest. What do you think of Cantwell and Murray?
Not much. Cantwell is not a pleasant personality and doesn't have an awful lot of influence in the Senate. Patty has been there and stayed there for a long time, worked on the things she's interested in, become a minor part of the leadership, and has some impact on what goes on. And I may say, in the time that we were there together, though we voted on opposite sides on almost everything, we got along personally quite well. And for example, one example of the way that Clinton would make deals was the way we picked federal court judges in the state of Washington. We had an interviewing committee made up of 6 people, 3 from each of us, who were to give us 3 names for each vacancy. Well, what that meant was that none of the names that came to us was totally obnoxious to either of us. They may not have been our first choice or like them, but they weren't totally obnoxious. And basically, in a time when the Republicans were in the majority in the Senate and Clinton was governor, we sort of got our first choice every other time out of that list of 3, and it worked.
Yeah. What do you think of the media, newspapers?
I was telling Ed when we walked in here, well, the Columbian has survived in this terrible climate for newspapers, and I'm very happy that you're still here.
But I mean,
So
what kind of job do you think? I mean, you've obviously dealt with the media quite a bit, not just the Columbian, obviously. But what's your view on the media today?
I had a wonderful celebratory drink the day the Seattle PI died.
So you weren't fans of the Seattle PI?
No.
Oh, I mean, do you have an opinion of the media in general, though?
Would you mean newspapers?
Yeah, let's talk about newspapers. Yeah.
Well, personally, I regard them as a necessity. I'm an old man. I get my news by reading it, and not by seeing it.
Yeah.
I think that taken as a whole, the newspapers in the United States are well to the left of the American people, I don't think the New York Times is worth using as toilet paper, and so I read the Wall Street Journal.
Okay. All right. But do you believe that the country would be better or worse off if they disappeared?
Oh, it would be worse off. There's no question about that.
Okay.
Are you dabbling?
Good.
Are you dabbling in the internet at all with news?
Do I?
Yeah.
Yes, I do some.
Yeah, do you? Where do you like to go?
Well, I'm basically, even though I disagree with the newspaper, I'm on the Washington Post. I get all of the Washington Post stuff, and I read a great deal on my email from them.
So, what is your take on the campaign finance system? Is it a mess? Should it be fixed in some way, or is it okay?
Every campaign reform that's been passed in the last 30 years has made the situation worse. My campaign, my response to it would be, if I were making the laws, I'd repeal all of them. I would allow unlimited contributions immediately disclosed going to the candidates. Even when we were halfway to where we are now, so much of the money that was spent in races in which I was involved wasn't by me, even when it was for me, and wasn't by my opponent, even though it was for my opponent. Far better, it would seem to me, is if all of the advertising, if it was for me, had my name on it and I was responsible for it. And so just full and immediate disclosure and no other limitations.
How about the whole superdelegate situation? That's gotten a lot of discussion this time around on the
I wish
presidential
we
race.
Republicans had more superdelegates. We wouldn't be talking about Trump.
But, I mean, do you think that's a good way of, the superdelegate way, is that a good way to help elect a president?
Yes, I really do think it is. The people who are in it know the candidates better. They know the issues better. I like primary elections, but I wouldn't leave the presidency solely to the way the primaries go out. No, I think the Democrats have a better system than the Republicans do in picking their candidates for
So
president.
you just don't buy the argument that feels too much like backroom dealing with the highfalutin people getting these superdelegates?
Absolutely.
Oh, that it? Oh, you agree with that, but it's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have the top two primary because the old blanket primary was declared unconstitutional by a decision reached by Justice Scalia. One of the worst decisions I've ever read in my life. Justice Scalia got a majority of the Supreme Court to agree that the associational First Amendment rights of political parties were violated by a system in which anyone could declare himself to be a Republican candidate or a Democratic candidate, and anybody, all voters, could vote effectively in the other side's primaries. What that meant, and district courts were moving in that direction, if that had stuck, and if that decision had applied to the top two primary, would have been, we would have gone back to the 19th century before there were direct primaries, and the smoke-filled room, only there wouldn't have been any smoke. in it in any longer. But all of the nominations would be conducted that way, because if the Republican organization could tell me whether or not I could run as a Republican, it could, in effect, in every primary election, say there's only one approved candidate. It was an awful decision. It reflected the fact that no one on the Supreme Court had ever run for any kind of office or knew anything about it at all. Now, fortunately, and Rob McKenna played a big role on this. He successfully defended the alternate of the top two primary. The theory is that the top two primary is not a partisan primary because it doesn't nominate one candidate from each party, and therefore was free from that associational line. Scalia dissented in that, but fortunately he lost. So yes, I do think that people who have worked all their lives and are in politics should have some say over who their presidential nominee is. I've just almost finished with a biography of James Garfield. And even with my interest in American history, I've never known anything other than that he was president for a few months and was assassinated. Actually, he was killed by his doctors. The bullet wound was not fatal until they just infected him. But James Garfield was nominated by the Republican Party in 1880, when the Republican Party was every bit as split as it was today. The old liners who were against civil service propped up Grant to have a third term. The mugwumps, the mug on one side of the fence and the rump on the other side of the fence, had two nominees, James Blaine, the man from Maine, and John Sherman, a senator from Ohio who was the brother of General Sherman. And James Garfield was a member of Congress from Ohio at that time. He was a great orator, and he was picked by Sherman to nominate him. And it's a long nominating speech, of course, in the midst of which he says, "And what do we want?" And the delegates yelled, "Garfield, Garfield." He had no votes on the first two ballots in that convention, and eventually swept it. And he was a true radical Republican. He would have sent the troops back to the South to enforce black rights who had been withdrawn the same before. A total civil rights person. I think an extraordinary character when you read this biography, and shot by a crazy man, by a man who was literally insane, because who had wanted to be appointed ambassador to France and hadn't gotten the appointment.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Great. Well, Senator, I thank you very much for coming in. I think we'll let you go. But
what a treat. Thank you.
Okay. Well, this
Been
was, as I
enjoyable.
say, I always enjoyed coming to the Columbian, and I'm happy.
You're always
that-
welcome.
Pardon?
You're always
stop by
welcome.
again.
Yeah, anytime. Really appreciate it. Yeah, has anybody ever called you a straight shooter before?
Oh, I think so on a couple of occasions. But the Washington teams have called me Slippery Slade.
Everybody's got a nickname.